Coming up.
The Prime Minister's had a pretty rough ride. He's faced an incredibly bad economy, mostly because of bad decisions he's made. But you know, when someone says the right thing, I think it's important that we call it out. And he recently said this, and I'd like to get your comments, Professor, on this. One of the fundamental challenges around affordability is they would love to say, well, you know what, we just need more money. Can you send us more benefits or send us extra $1,000 a month? As soon as you do that, inflation goes up by exactly the same amount.
Last time you were here, you had an exchange regarding the carbon tax, and one of the members mentioned about the open letter that many Canadian economists had signed on to, and you didn't have a chance in person at the time to respond to that comment. I know you did submit something in writing, but I thought since you're back and you're here in person, I'd give you a chance to let the committee know your thoughts on that open letter.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the panelists for being here. My questions will stick to the professor there. And so I just I want to start off, and you know, the Prime Minister's had a pretty rough ride. He's faced an incredibly bad economy, mostly because of bad decisions he's made. But you know, when someone says the right thing, I think it's important that we call it out. And he recently said this, and I'd like to get your comments, Professor, on this. One of the fundamental challenges around affordability is they would love to say, well, you know what, we just need more money. Can you send us more benefits or send us extra $1,000 a month? As soon as you do that, inflation goes up by exactly the same amount. So clearly what he's saying there is that the more you spend, the more inflation you get, which undermines the exact policy objectives the governments are trying to achieve. Would you agree with the Prime Minister here, or do you think he's all wet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think that the Prime Minister is correct. The larger point is that you can't fix a housing crisis that's basically a supply-side problem. There's structural problems in the sector, and throwing money at it will only, as with fiscal spending in general, will only create more inflation. So I think he's right.
And so when we look at this Bill C-69, which forecasts a $40 billion deficit, and in fact, there's many ways that deficit could be actually understated, one of which is with respect to their expecting a fire sale on capital gains, which is going to, according to their projection, get an additional $7 billion. We haven't even seen that legislation yet, so we don't know whether those $7 billion or whether that fire sale is going to example. Do you think that it is a responsible government to be continuing to run large deficits and debts?
No, I don't. I think it's very clear that we've learned the lesson, or we should have learned the lesson, of what happened in the U.S. in the global financial crisis. And luckily at that time, Canada didn't go into QE very much, but we went all in the pandemic. And we've seen the result. We have massive fiscal slippage. We've had very, very loose, ultra loose monetary policy, which caused inflation to spike at a 40-year high. And now we're paying the price with high interest rates that are penalizing everyone. It's been very, very poor macroeconomic management. That's the simplest. Yes, it was the pandemic was a difficult crisis. And it would have been hard for any government, perhaps, to deal with it, to solve it, and when everyone else was also going down. But it's pretty clear now, and I think I was maybe one of the few commentators calling this out even in 2021, that when you have QE, in other words, when you have the central bank monetizing government deficits, essentially printing more money, creating more balances for the chartered banks. You know, the curve just took off, looks like this. You're storing up a major inflation crisis, and then you're going to have to raise interest rates. So it's kind of a boom and bust cycle. So it's been very, very poor macro management, Mr. Chair.
And one of the other issues that the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, amongst many others, have highlighted is that our low productivity is actually fueling inflation, because the less goods that we produce means that the more dollars that are required, which increases inflation. Do you believe that given that this is the time to be increasing taxes on one of the most important elements of productivity, which is capital?
Absolutely not, because that's taking us in the wrong direction. That's going to further retard capital formation. It's going to make our workers less productive. And that's really our Achilles heel in Canada. We simply don't have enough capital for the number of workers we have. And ultimately, Keynesian-style macroeconomic policy, whether fiscal or monetary, yes, can give you a short-term boost, but it cannot solve deep-seated structural problems. It really only will make things worse.
Right. And so by continuing to spend an excessive amount to have an expansionary fiscal time, a fiscal policy at this time will in fact increase the size of government, which will suffocate the private sector, reduce productivity, and hurt all Canadians. Particularly, you can agree or disagree, but I believe it's the most vulnerable who often get hit hardest by low growth, low productivity, and high inflation.
I couldn't agree more, Mr. Chair. I wrote an op-ed in the Financial Post back in the fall of 2021, saying that the left and a government that claims to be progressive should care about inflation because, in fact, it's the most vulnerable who are most hurt by it. The wealthy have all kinds of savvy financial techniques and tricks they can use to escape the burden of inflation, but the poor and the middle class simply cannot. So I find it honestly a little baffling that a progressive-minded government was so nonchalant about inflation, and so was the Bank of Canada, and they're also, I think, bear a large part of the blame. I think both the federal government and the Bank of Canada.
And now it's a day late and a dollar short, but it does appear as though the Prime Minister's finally gotten this message after not thinking about monetary policy that in fact spending does lead to inflation, and that's right from the Prime Minister there.
Thank you, Professor DeHasia. Last time you were here, you had an exchange regarding the carbon tax, and one of the members mentioned about the open letter that many Canadian economists had signed on to, and you didn't have a chance in person at the time to respond to that comment. I know you did submit something in writing, but I thought since you're back and you're here in person, I'd give you a chance to let the committee know your thoughts on that open letter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, I would say this, and again, this is part of the record of the committee. Under well-known economists, including some of my own colleagues at Carleton, have signed this letter. It doesn't mean that it's correct. Yes, in the world of the textbook, you can shift curves around and get at the optimal outcome. Well, in the real world, it doesn't work that way. There's a whole political economy of taxation. And so if you get things wrong, you can have this risk of regulatory capture. There's a large literature on this. So I'm not sanguine that just going by textbook economics can fix the problem. But there's a larger problem. I'll make this very brief. Global warming, climate change, which is real, is a global problem. So if Canada, which is not one of the world's major contributors, says, okay, we're going to tax ourselves and pollute less, well, guess what? China and India will rub their hands and say, super, we can spew more carbon since Canada is doing the work for us. So it makes no sense.
In your written reply, you actually said, unfortunately, I believe the letter is naive and ideologically driven. Could you expand on that statement?
Sure, thank you. Naive because it assumes that the textbook world can be reproduced in practice, and we know that isn't true. And I think it is driven ideologically by a theory that used to be called scientific socialism, that the all-benevolent, all-knowing central planner of the government can solve every problem. Professor Hayek, whose name has come up here, didn't believe that. And so for those reasons, I think it's naive, it's ill-timed, it's ideological. And even if we thought it could work in practice, which I seriously doubt, we're in the middle of an affordability crisis. Now is certainly not the time to be the knight in shining armor and to tell China and India, go spew more carbon into the air.
Thank you, Professor.